Welcome guys and gals to the first video of this channel. And I thank you for watching this video. Now as you can see, I am a stick man and I don't know much about humans, so I will try to keep this as much as humane as possible. Now I may not have veins or pure human blood, but I still have the heart. But a sticky heart. So yeah. But let's get right to the topic. Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, according to the creation myth of the Abrahamic religions, were the first man and woman. They are central to the belief that humanity is in essence a single family, with everyone descended from a single pair of original ancestors. It also provides the basis for the doctrines of the fall of man and original sin that are important beliefs in Christianity, although not held in Judaism or Islam. In the book of Genesis of the Hebrew Bible, chapters 1 through 5, there are two creation narratives with two distinct perspectives. In the first, Adam and Eve are not mentioned, at least not mentioned by name. Instead, God created humankind in God's image and instructed them to multiply and to be stewards over everything else that God had made. In the second narrative, God fashions Adam from dust and places him in the Garden of Eden. Adam is told that he can eat freely of all the trees in the garden, except for a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Subsequently, Eve is created from one of Adam's ribs to be Adam's companion. They are innocent and unembarrassed about their nakedness. However, a serpent deceives Eve into eating fruit from the forbidden tree, and she gives some of the fruit to Adam. These acts give them additional knowledge, but it gives them the ability to conjure negative and destructive concepts such as shame and evil. God later curses the serpent and the ground. God prophetically tells the woman and the man what will be the consequences of their sin of disobeying God. Then he banishes them from the Garden of Eden. The story underwent extensive elaboration in later Abrahamic traditions, and it has been extensively analyzed by modern biblical scholars. Interpretations and beliefs regarding Adam and Eve and the story revolving around them vary across religions and sects. For example, the Islamic version of the story holds that Adam and Eve were equally responsible for their sins of hubris, instead of Eve being the first one to be unfaithful. The story of Adam and Eve is often depicted in art, and it has had an important influence in literature and poetry. The story of the fall of Adam is often understood to be an allegory. There is no physical evidence that Adam and Eve ever existed, and their literal existence is incompatible with human evolutionary genetics. However, there is in some countries a large discrepancy between the scientific consensus and popular opinion. A 2014 poll reports that 56% of Americans believe that Adam and Eve were real people, and 44% believe so with strong or absolute certainty. Hebrew Bible narrative. Adam and Eve are figures from the primeval history, Genesis 1-11, the Bible's mythic history of the first years of the world's existence. The history tells how God creates the world and all its beings and places the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, in his Garden of Eden, how the first couple are expelled from God's presence, of the first murder which follows, and God's decision to destroy the world and save only the righteous Noah and his sons. A new humanity then descends from these sons and spreads throughout the world. Although the new world is as sinful as the old, God has resolved never again to destroy the world by flood, and the history ends with Terah, the father of Abraham, from whom will descend God's chosen people, the Israelites. Genesis 4 introduces the humans in their life outside God's garden. The chapter deals with the birth of Adam's sons Cain and Abel and the story of the first murder, followed by the birth of a third son, Seth. Genesis 5, the book of the generations of Adam, lists the descendants of Adam from Seth to Noah with their ages at the birth of their first sons, except Adam himself, for whom his age at the birth of Seth, his third son, is given, and their ages at death. Adam lives 930 years. The chapter notes that Adam had other sons and daughters after Seth, but does not name them. Adam has already named the woman Eve at the end of the Eden narrative, and in Genesis 4:25 and for the first time, he is called Adam as a personal name. The fall and expulsion from Eden. The Adam and Eve story continues in Genesis 3 with the expulsion from Eden narrative. A form analysis of Genesis 3 reveals that this portion of the story can be characterized as a parable or wisdom tale in the wisdom tradition. The poetic addresses of the chapter belong to a speculative type of wisdom that questions the paradoxes and harsh realities of life. This characterization is determined by the narrative's format, settings, and the plot. The form of Genesis 3 is also shaped by its vocabulary, making use of various puns and double entendres. 11. The expulsion from Eden narrative begins with a dialogue between the woman and a serpent. 12 Identified in Genesis 3:1 as an animal that was more crafty than any other animal made by God, although Genesis does not identify the serpent with Satan. 13:16 The woman is willing to talk to the serpent and respond to the creature's cynicism by repeating God's prohibition against eating fruit from the tree of knowledge, Genesis 2:17. 14 The woman is lured into dialogue on the serpent's terms, which directly disputes God's command. 15 The serpent assures the woman that God will not let her die if she ate the fruit, and, furthermore, that if she ate the fruit, her eyes would be opened and she would be like God, knowing good and evil, Genesis 3:5. The woman sees that the fruit of the tree of knowledge is a delight to the eye and that it would be desirable to acquire wisdom by eating the fruit. The woman eats the fruit and gives some to the man, Genesis 3:6. With this the man and woman recognize their own nakedness, and they make loincloths of fig leaves, Genesis 3:7. 16. In the next narrative dialogue, God questions the man and the woman, Genesis 3:8, 13, and God initiates a dialogue by calling out to the man with a rhetorical question designed to consider his wrongdoing. The man explains that he hid in the garden out of fear because he realized his own nakedness, Genesis 3:10. This is followed by two more rhetorical questions designed to show awareness of a defiance of God's command. The man then points to the woman as the real offender, and he implies that God is responsible for the tragedy because the woman was given to him by God, Genesis 3:12. God challenges the woman to explain herself, whereby she shifts the blame to the serpent, Genesis 3:13. Offspring. Genesis 4 tells of the birth of Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's first children, while Genesis 5 gives Adam's genealogy past that. Adam and Eve are listed as having 3 children, Cain, Abel, and Seth, then other sons and daughters, Genesis 5:4. According to the Book of Jubilees, which is usually not considered canonical, Cain married his sister Awan, a daughter of Adam and Eve. Abrahamic traditions. Judaism. For the Jewish weekly Torah portion, see Bereshit, Parsha, 3rd reading, and Bereshit, Parsha, 4th reading. It was also recognized in ancient Judaism, that there are 2 distinct accounts for the creation of man. The first account says male and female God created them, implying simultaneous creation, whereas the second account states that God created Eve subsequent to the creation of Adam. The Midrash Rabbah, Genesis 8:1 reconciled the two by stating that Genesis 1, male and female he created them, indicates that God originally created Adam as a hermaphrodite 37 bodily and spiritually both male and female, before creating the separate beings of Adam and Eve. Other rabbis suggested that Eve and the woman of the first account were 2 separate individuals, the first being identified as Lilith, a figure elsewhere described as a night demon. According to traditional Jewish belief, Adam and Eve are buried in the cave of Machpelah, in Hebron. In Reform Judaism, Harry Orlinsky analyzes the Hebrew word nephesh in Genesis 2:7 where God breathes into the man's nostrils and he becomes nephesh haya. Orlinsky argues that the earlier translation of the phrase living soul is incorrect. He points out that nephesh signifies something like the English word being, in the sense of a corporeal body capable of life. The concept of a soul in the modern sense did not exist in Hebrew thought until around the 2nd century BC, when the idea of a bodily resurrection gained popularity. Christianity. Some early fathers of the Christian Church held Eve responsible for the fall of man and all subsequent women to be the first sinners because Eve tempted Adam to commit the taboo. "You are the devil's gateway," Tertullian told his female listeners, and went on to explain that they were responsible for the death of Christ, on account of your desert, i.e., punishment for sin, that is, death, even the Son of God had to die. 39 In 1486, the Dominicans Kramer and Sprongler used similar tracts in Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches, to justify the persecution of witches. Medieval Christian art often depicted the Edenic serpent as a woman, often identified as Lilith, thus both emphasizing the serpent's seductiveness as well as its relationship to Eve. Several early church fathers, including Clement of Alexandria and Eusebius of Caesarea, interpreted the Hebrew Heva as not only the name of Eve, but in its aspirated form as female serpent. Based on the Christian doctrine of the fall of man, came the doctrine of original sin. Saint Augustine of Hippo, 354–430, working with the Latin translation of the Epistle to the Romans, interpreted the Apostle Paul as having said that Adam's sin was hereditary, death passed upon, i.e., spread to all men because of Adam, in whom all sinned. Romans 5:12-40. Original sin became a concept that man is born into a condition of sinfulness and must await redemption. This doctrine became a cornerstone of Western Christian theological tradition, however, not shared by Judaism or the Orthodox churches. Over the centuries, a system of unique Christian beliefs had developed from these doctrines. Baptism became understood as a washing away of the stain of hereditary sin in many churches, although its original symbolism was apparently rebirth. Additionally, the serpent that tempted Eve was interpreted to have been Satan, or that Satan was using a serpent as a mouthpiece, although there is no mention of this identification in the Torah and it is not held in Judaism. Conservative Protestants typically interpret Genesis 3 as defining humanity's original parents as Adam and Eve, who disobeyed God's prime directive that they were not to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, NIV. When they disobeyed, they committed a major transgression against God and were immediately punished, which led to the fall of humanity. Thus, sin and death entered the universe for the first time. Adam and Eve were ejected from the Garden of Eden, never to return. Gnostic traditions. Gnostic Christianity discussed Adam and Eve in two known surviving texts, namely the Apocalypse of Adam found in the Nag Hammadi documents and the Testament of Adam. The creation of Adam as protoanthropo, the original man, is the focal concept of these writings. Another Gnostic tradition held that Adam and Eve were created to help defeat Satan. The serpent, instead of being identified with Satan, is seen as a hero by the Ophites. Still other Gnostics believed that Satan's fall, however, came after the creation of humanity. As in Islamic tradition, this story says that Satan refused to bow to Adam due to pride. Satan said that Adam was inferior to him as he was made of fire, whereas Adam was made of clay. This refusal led to the fall of Satan recorded in works such as the Book of Enoch. Islam. In Islam, Adam, Arabic, whose role is being the father of humanity, is looked upon by Muslims with reverence. Eve, Awa, Arabic, is the mother of humanity. 42 The creation of Adam and Eve is referred to in the Quran, although different Quranic interpreters give different views on the actual creation story. Quran, Surat Al-Nisa, verse 1. 43. In Al-Qumi's tafsir on the Garden of Eden, such place was not entirely earthly. According to the Quran, both Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit in a heavenly Eden, see also Jannah. As a result, they were both sent down to earth as God's representatives. Each person was sent to a mountain peak, Adam on Al-Safa, and Eve on Al-Marwa. In this Islamic tradition, Adam wept 40 days until he repented, after which God sent down the black stone, teaching him the Hajj. According to a prophetic hadith, Adam and Eve reunited in the plain of Arafat, near Mecca. 44 They had two sons together, Kabil and Habil. There is also a legend of a younger son, named Rokael, who created a palace and sepulchre containing autonomous statues that lived out the lives of men so realistically they were mistaken for having souls. 45 The concept of original sin does not exist in Islam, because according to Islam Adam and Eve were forgiven by God. When God orders the angels to bow to Adam, Eve questioned, "Why should I bow to man? I am made of pure fire and he is made of soil." 46. The liberal movements within Islam have viewed God's commanding the angels to bow before Adam as an exaltation of humanity, and as a means of supporting human rights. Others view it as an act of showing Adam that the biggest enemy of humans on earth will be their ego. Well, there you have it guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed and loved it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe.